You're listening to The Deep End, a Penn plastic surgery podcast. Today, Dr. Saeed Azuri sits down with Dr. L. Scott Levin, one of the most influential figures in plastic surgery and orthopedic surgery. Dr. Levin is the former chief of plastic surgery at Duke University and has led the Department of Orthopedic Surgery here at Penn Medicine for over a decade, driving it to become at one point the top NIH-funded department in the country. His list of accomplishments is staggering. To name a few, he was chair of orthopedic surgery and professor of plastic surgery at Penn, innovator in vascularized composite allotransplantation, past president of the American Society for Reconstructive Microsurgery, and the mastermind behind Penn's world-renowned hand transplant program. Dr. Levin is a pioneer in microsurgery and a global leader in limb salvage and reconstruction, having performed groundbreaking procedures like the world's first pediatric hand transplant. Today, we'll discuss his incredible journey, from his humble beginnings and rigorous training to his philosophy on mentorship, leadership, and innovation in surgery. Let's dive in.
So welcome to the Deep End podcast. This is actually, we got an Amazon package this morning.
Oh.
A deep mug.
Wow, let me see
So
that.
this is the official Dr. Levin
Deep End.
the Deep End mug.
I love it. I love it. It has our seal on there.
Yeah.
And the Deep End. Now, what's deep, Dr. Azuri? I know deep. Oh, deep inferior epigastric perforator flap. Yeah, I've heard of those. I did my first one about 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Well, it was a free tram.
Yeah.
For Dr. Greg Georgiade, who was our breast surgeon at the time. And actually, it's interesting in terms of history. Don Surfin, who was the chief, I think did one of the first microvascular breast reconstructions. And then he gave it up. And I don't know if he used a groin flap. I can't remember the flap that he used. But this was even before Hartranft described, the abdominal-based flap. And Don was one of the pioneers, with Harry Bunke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And hired me into plastic surgery.
Oh, yeah.
It was very controversial at the time with a lot of opposition. This guy's an orthopod, he can't operate, why are you hiring him? And, I've said in different forums how much I appreciated Don Serafin's, quote, investment in me. The other interesting thing is that when I was a Duke undergraduate, in 1977, when I graduated college, as the Europeans say, university, I went to Hiroshima and studied hand surgery with a very famous hand surgeon by the name of Ken Yatsuge, who was the chair of the department there, and a young attending was there by the name of Yoshikatsu Ikuta, the Ikuta clan.
Yeah.
I saw my first microsurgery after watching Jim Urbanik just do replantation. I worked in his lab as an undergrad, so this is probably 50 years ago. Literally
Crazy.
50 years ago, so 1974.
Yeah.
I saw my first microsurgery, because we only had replantation. So I've seen the history of reconstructive surgery and microsurgery, and then the talk by Babak Marar this morning, just all the stuff in lymphatics and the robot and, the advancement of our specialty in many domains, right? Transgender surgery, the sophistication of craniofacial surgery, virtual surgical planning. It's interesting, and Dave Savaston, who was my surgical mentor from Hopkins, preceded Dr. Cameron by many years at Hopkins, really always talked about history. So, you and I share a passion about history. Our other colleagues, Aaron Warman is just an impeccable colleague, dedicated to the written word and all the artifacts that Aaron finds. And then, people like Joe Cerletti and I talk about the old days. Joe started at Rochester, and I think I was his first Bacamgian lecture.
That's crazy.
Probably 25 years ago. So anyhow, sorry I got diverted.
No, I love. That's the whole purpose. The whole purpose of this is to get diverted. But
You had questions for me, so.
Well, even without the questions, I think what's important for everyone to hear is if I were to go on script and talk about you, I would list that you're basically president of everything that's important to our specialty, the orthopedic surgery specialty. You've basically accomplished it all in your life. You were the chief of plastic surgery at Duke and made Duke really put it on the map for plastic surgery. You came here as chair of orthopedic surgery at Penn and made it the top NIH-funded department in the country. And to bridge both specialties and do it so well. So anyways, that is the on-script version. And now...
You're kind, thank you.
No, but what I want to do is I really want to introduce you a little bit off-script. And
Yeah.
what I would say about you off-script is you are the most special person I think I've ever met.
Very kind.
You are like, as a mentor, a friend. I want to share a short story with the audience that I approached you. I think I approached you the morning.
The flap's gone down. You better answer that. That breast is not looking.
It's probably my wife. But
That's even more important. Don't disappoint Brittany.
But I approached you I think a day or two before you were giving your presidential address to the Hand Society, and most people would have no time for anything but preparation. And you, on top of having free flaps over free flaps over free flaps and a busy clinical schedule, you responded to me and said, let's meet in the Hub Pavilion cafeteria. And you talked to me for probably at least an hour about pursuing fellowship at Memorial Sloan Kettering, my future. And this is somebody who has less than 48 hours to prepare for their presidential address. And beyond that, every moment I've ever reached out to you for any questions, support, advice, case preparation, case help, you put everything away and you help me. And on top of that, I know how much your extended family is important to you, your brother, your mother, your father, your Helga, and you're a role model to us all, not only within the world of surgery, but also as a family person, a mentor, a leader, and everything. So I can't thank you enough for just using your life to set such a great example for young surgeons, old surgeons, retired surgeons, and everybody. But
Thanks.
I'm lucky I didn't get too emotional during that,
No, you're very
during that
kind.
introduction. But so I wanted to, with all that being said, I think what's important is your upbringing. And these are the type of things that you don't have the opportunity to talk about at one of your presidential, maybe you do, but tell me a little bit about your upbringing, because clearly your parents, how you grew up, and how that probably molded you into becoming the type of person you
Sure.
are.
Well, I mean, I'll give you some vignettes of my family. And first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words. You know, the expression, pay it forward, you're very gracious, but you know, I see in you and many of the people in Penn medicine and Penn surgery, orthopedics, plastic surgery, neurosurgery. It's a joy to invest in people like you, such as yourself, because I know that investment and I came from a different time, you know, in surgical training. It was very, very rigorous, and I'm digressing for a second, but I'll come back to that, but it's a joy because younger folks are enthusiastic. It's our obligation to pay it forward, to pass it down. It's what makes us fulfilled to see how successful you are, you know, seeing your intensity and your accomplishments as a resident. All the things, for example, you did, not only the written word and academic manuscripts and projects, very prolific. You know, the Halstead resident from Hopkins, that Hopkins legacy that, of course, you and I are connected through Dave Savaston and the history of Halstead and what Hopkins still is, and our colleagues who have been there and still there, whether it's, you know, Paul Manson or, you know, Andy Lee and Rick Redette, the history of, you know, the plastic surgeons there. As you know, Halstead denigrated and found no place for plastic surgery, but yet it certainly evolved. And then I know the orthopedic community down there and history of surgery, and then you're a product of that. You should be very, very proud of that, the time you invested in the lab. And here we are. So then you were resident, very accomplished. Yes, of course, Sloan Kettering is a phenomenal.
No, this is about you.
No, but I'm just saying that this is very important. You can edit this as much as you want to cut the whole thing out. But I want it to be on record that, look, you went up there, you were the most accomplished fellow of your year, fellow of the year award, and then you've come back, and that intensity and that commitment and that humility and that hard work ethic has continued in the last couple of years since you've been on faculty and you've forged your own path. Even the idea about the deep interviews, seeing all the people coming through, it's a tribute to, you're always thinking, or one needs to be always thinking. I'm almost 70, and we just did our.
You don't have to say your age on it. Okay. I'll edit that out. We, the Penn team, did our 5th bilateral hand transplant 3 weeks ago. This guy went home after 14 days. Home, he's in the apartment. He's from Switzerland. The evolving robotic microsurgery that we're forging into here, the expansion of limb salvage, with Kyle Potter, my successor in orthopedics, doing osseointegrated implants, and all these sophisticated evolving things, right, in lower and upper extremity, TMR, RPNI, VPNI, vascularized reconstructive peripheral, all these stuff. There's always something new. And I think the mark of somebody who contributes is, A, you keep an open mind, and B, you try to have impact. That's the rule. What impact are we having? And I think our impact is different at different phases of our career. I'm still at the, quote, end. I'm sure as hell not at the beginning. I'm at the end, still in the areas I mentioned, VCA, sitting on the National Academy of Science of Hand and Face Consensus Conference, involved with the FDA clearance of robotic microsurgery. Yes, I'm a consultant for the company, and I'll disclose that publicly now because that's important. Passionate still about microsurgery. I mean, if I'm not doing a flap or two a week, I have withdrawal, like an addict, and it's so much fun. I'll have Helga listen.
It's fun. I still love it.
Yeah.
I mean, and we say the adage, Saeed, and again, I'm off track now, but I have time, so we'll do.
Yeah, of course, no.
Every time those clamps come off, and I see that artery beating and venous return, and then the patients that come back to the clinic, I mean, remarkable part of medical history, with Jacobson and Suarez, and then Harry Bunke's work, and Bernie O'Brien's work, and Tamai, and all the people around the world. And here we now, doing here, what do we do, 850 flaps here last year? Bob Monroe was just here from Sloan. How many flaps do they do a year? 700, 800?
Yeah.
Our Anderson colleagues, other places. So it still thrills me.
Yeah.
So I'll stop.
No, and so how do you think, like, I know,
how I grew up.
well, because I know for me, my dad, obviously my mom too, my dad had a tremendous impact on my career. He was a gynecologist trained at Hopkins. I saw the discipline. He worked till he was 82, even with metastatic cancer, and every day, he would have worked till, somebody forced him out of the hospital. But I know your family is so important to you, your dad, your mom. Tell me about your upbringing.
Well, my dad was a naval career officer and met my mom, and then left the Navy. He is buried at Arlington with full military honors. He was a Silver Star awardee for his service, and captain of a minesweeper in Korean War. And I grew up in a military household. My dad was very patriotic. My mom was the daughter of an otolaryngologist, Leon Felderman, who was my grandfather, who I never met. And interesting, Laurent Lantieri helped me find the French Legion of Honor award my grandfather got for working in World War II in France, taking care of the war-injured soldiers. Wow. He was an ENT guy. He studied in Bordeaux, believe it or not, as part of his training. This is in the 1918, 1920, and I have his medals in my study at home. But I always heard about my grandfather. My uncle was a urologist, his son, and my mom always used to talk about her dad. And as a young kid, I didn't know what the difference between an orthopedic surgeon is and a proctologist, But he was an otolaryngologist. He wrote a book called The Human Voice. His patients were people like Jean Tunney, the boxer, Lillian Gish. I think he might have done a rhinoplasty on her. So this is family lore. Fast forward that I got interested in science, and I had a supportive family. My dad was in business. My mom was a homemaker, and said, okay, after going to Duke as an undergrad, I want to go to med school. And I actually worked my way through college. I was an orderly and moved patients around Duke Hospital, swept the floors in the emergency room. Applied to medical school. Actually didn't get in my first 2 years. Ultimately went to the British West Indies for 2 years and then transferred to Temple Medical School here in Philadelphia, and never looked back. If you want something bad enough, you'll sacrifice to put yourself in a place where you can succeed.
And nothing will stand in your way.
No, nothing will stand in your way. And I tell people, a lot of times we have residents come, oh, I didn't get my first choice in residency, I got my second choice. Or it's not the medical school I wanted to go to, I got my second choice. And I say, I worked really hard just to get my MD. And I had to go abroad for 2 years to go to a foreign medical school, all in English in the West Indies. I lived under martial law when the island was overthrown by Maurice Bishop, who was a lawyer. Overturned the government. A guy, Eric Gary, who was like Idi Amin, who was a little crazy, believed in U.S. This is all true. And this is 1978 to 1980. And then in 1980, I came back to Temple and graduated Temple Medical School. It was great in those days. There was no Libby Zion rule. So, I remember as a senior medical student cracking chests and putting in chest tubes and subclavians. So when I got to Duke as an intern in 1982, under Dr. Savston, I was a Duke undergrad, returned there, knew the hospital a little bit, and spent 2 years in general thoracic surgery. Every other night on call, there was no orthopedic. So, I'd argue to you that in today's work hour restriction, in 2 years of general thoracic surgery, I probably did the equivalent of almost 4 years of surgery, and did thoracotomies and hernias, and there was no laparoscopic cholecystectomy in those days. So I remember tying off the cystic duct, and the attending screaming at me, "Don't let that slip, because that would be bad." And to make a long story short, then I was slotted in to do orthopedics. In those days, you had to have 2 years of general thoracic training, then 4 years of orthopedics. And Dr. Savston asked me if I would consider going into cardiac surgery after my intern year. Will you switch? And I didn't. It's a principle I've always adhered to, that once you make a commitment, you should keep that commitment, unless there are unbelievable circumstances that cause you to change. And parallel story, and I'll come back to my Duke days. Parallel story is that when I accepted the job as chair of orthopedics here, people said, "Oh, Levin's at Duke, he'll never leave. He'll never leave plastic surgery." And it was actually Joe Cerletti, who called me and said, "We're looking for a new orthopedic chair. Do you have any ideas?" And I said, and I knew Joe very well. We've known each other a long time. I said, "Yeah, how about me?" And here we are.
That's amazing.
17 or 18 years later. But
so your dad is, and
so
thinking,
my dad was a naval career officer.
So his discipline that you witness, do you think that that's what has made you so disciplined?
His work ethic, and not all good. He was a workaholic. I'm a workaholic.
That sounds familiar.
Well, I've been very open about. There's a price to pay for that. I went through a hard divorce, and my children suffered, and I suffered. But nevertheless, that's why I've tried to be a little more balanced, and particularly with the trainees, make sure that family is protected. And you can work hard and achieve a lot in an academic career, and also take care of your family. You're a prime example of that. I talk to you about Brittany and your kids all the time.
Well, it's also a tough thing. I mean, you trained with
Right.
Savastin
Right.
when there were no breaks, and you
Right.
you basically, I mean, surgery was your life. It is your life,
Mhm.
like Halstead, living in the hospital, basically.
That's what I call them residents.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I admire the ability to train during those times, but then be so open to a culture change and understanding that there's some sort of work-life balance and things like
Yeah,
that.
it would be very wrong to perpetuate that with the rigor that existed. Quote, maybe.
Mhm.
Some people still believe in that, but I think also the pendulum has swung too far.
Yeah.
That's a biased statement by
Mhm.
me, but when I hear quote, a certain percentage, a high percentage of our quote medical students are burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
Medical students burn out.
Mm-hmm.
Life's tough. Wait till they get to residency.
Mm-hmm.
PGY 1 year. The rigors of practice. So maybe
100%.
we're not selecting the right people that have resilience.
I think it's a good point, and I think you have to find ways, or you're not enjoying what you do.
Yeah.
John Cameron used to and he's going to be on the podcast too, but
Yeah.
he used to always tell me, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
So my dad told me. Yeah.
And I think that's very important, and understanding that and making time for your family, it can all be done. And I think when I look at you as an example, you set the example for others, and hopefully, I agree with the whole times have changed and things like that, but hopefully there are people that still see this in others and look up to others.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting because I always look at your discipline. I look at how you're always on time. You always say that being early is.
No, if you're on time, you're 10 minutes late.
Yeah, if you're on time, you're 10 minutes late. And so I'm sure those are all things you kind of learned from your dad.
Yeah.
And hearing your story about the West Indies, we're all very thankful that you pursued your desire, or else we would have lost a significant legend in our field. And even in orthopedic surgery, it's like I said, it's so crazy to have somebody who's continues to contribute in two separate disciplines and to the American College of Surgeons as well.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking back to your time as the chief of plastic surgery at Duke, I think, how many years were you into practice when you became the chief? Was it?
It was only 4.
4 years. You became the chief.
Yeah, I was the chief resident for a year and a half, because when I started in plastic surgery, the Duke residents went to Louisville for hand fellowship for 6-month period and so forth.
With Bob Acklin.
With Bob Acklin and Harold Kleinert and Joe Coots
Mm-hmm.
and Louis Schecker and Suman Tsai and Dan Adesoy and Tom Wolfe, and just an incredible faculty. As a matter, Raja Sababathy and I were co-fellows. David Netcher was in my class. Sally Langley from New Zealand. Robert Ferreira from Brazil. I mean, just an unbelievable array of talented people. And they said when I joined, okay, we're going from 2.5 to 3 years. So I had an additional 6 months as a chief resident, so 18 months as a chief resident. And they asked me to join the faculty because they needed help with replants at Duke about a year after I started plastic surgery. I went literally right from chief residency in orthopedics graduation night. The next day I drove to Louisville and started my hand fellowship, and then came back to finish my plastic surgery at Penn. So finished in 91, and literally in 1995, the summer, I became acting chief.
Wow.
6 months later, I was named the chief of plastic surgery by Bob Anderson, who was a disciple of Dave Savastin, who was the chair of cardiothoracic surgery at Northwestern.
You were chief for how long?
14 years.
14 years, wow.
Right, and I had to climb the academic rank. I didn't negotiate anything. I had an interview with Anderson on a Saturday morning because they had a big international search, He said, well, I want you to interview for the job. I was made interim chair, like August 95.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through all these people that came through, Bob Russell and Quinter German, and can't remember, Steve Arian, I think, even interviewed. Just names that I vaguely recollect. And he said, I want to talk to you on Saturday, and he said, I want you to take the job. And before I knew it, Monday morning, he sent out an email that I'm the chief. I never negotiated. I got bookshelves from the library for the residents. That was it. And I was still an assistant professor at the time.
Wow.
I didn't say, well, if I'm going to be chair, then I have to concentrate on being chair, make me full professor. And my CV was, growing, and so I had to climb the academic ranks at Duke while being chief. And I think it was 5 years later that I became a full tenured professor at Duke. And then 2009, when Joe Cerletti called me, or 2008, it was December 2008 is when I interviewed and assumed the role here as chair of orthopedics, and with pride, professor of surgery in the division of plastic surgery. That was 2009. So a 15-year run here. So 29 years only.
As the longest acting chairman of any department here, right?
No. In orthopedics, you mean?
Or just in general?
No. The DeForest Willard might have been 29 years or something like that. Okay. There's I think 12 or 13 or 14 chairs since 1889, and my tenure was about in the middle of the pack, top of the pack middle, but not the longest one.
From your time at Duke, what do you think was your proudest moment as the chief there?
I think establishing the human tissue laboratory.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that.
And the Duke Flap course. It really started out with our foray into endoscopic plastic surgery. Monty Eves and Foad Nahai at Emory were doing endoscopic breast, and Monty and I were just recounting. We go back that far. Emory was a really incredible place. As a matter of fact, John Bostwick, the late John Bostwick and Foad Nahai, when I finished my plastic surgery, tried to recruit me to Emory to join the faculty there. I stayed at Duke. And I remember John Bostwick very well, incredible gentleman, incredibly talented marathon runner, just the nicest man, and committed suicide, which was a tragedy. I talked to Foad about that. As a matter of fact, at the American Association of Plastic Surgeons a number of years ago, we talked about, I gave the course when bad things happen to famous people. And, Shane Johnson talked about his child with a brain tumor, and Foad talked about John, and I talked about my divorce, and Bob Walton talked about Liz. I'm blanking on her last name. She was at Anderson.
Yep.
His wife, who passed away from cancer. Very, very sad.
Yeah.
So that's the whole point, coming back to the importance of family.
Yeah.
Mike Krzyzewski, who coached the Duke Blue Devils, who I know very well.
Of course.
The most important team you play on is your family.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I mean, I recognize that every day. And I personally think to be successful, you need that support. I 100%. Really do. And
I've credited Helga, my wife.
Oh my gosh, she's incredible.
But with my success at Duke, and certainly my success here, there is no question about it.
Yeah.
The most important person.
Yeah. No, she's absolutely wonderful. That's an obvious. And same with Brittany. When I found Brittany, I was like, this is the one who's going to be at my side all the time. She still wants me home at certain times.
Well, as she should. Yeah.
So the human tissue lab, hugely successful.
We also brought in Said. This is something that I think is so important in academic medicine. We had our dear friend and international leader Babak Marara, who you worked with at Sloan, and just he's such a great person. Bringing in visiting professors, a vibrant visiting professor program, is something I did at Penn, something I did at Duke, and there's a wall in the Baker House, which is the area where the plastic surgery office is, where you have pictures of everybody I brought, and it's sort of the who's who of plastic surgery from around the world. And it's not boasting, but the principle is, in a residency here, for example, incredible faculty, yourself included, Joe, Steve Kovac, and everybody, right? We can teach our residents, but to bring in other ideas from the outside and sprinkle in this influence or different culture, different perspective, is so vital to an outstanding residency.
Yeah.
And so I was very proud of the fact that we had a robust visiting professorship. You know, I had the late John Tebbets come,
Oh, wow.
who was became one of my dearest friends. You know, Foad, Bruce Alcower. We had Ian Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
one of my heroes, come. We had Alain Muscalet come
Wow.
to the flap course. And I mean, if you look at that wall, it's not just national, it's international
Mm-hmm.
people who came. We had Fu Chang come, you know, I was with him in '91 in Taiwan. That's a very important thing. You know, you and I, with Steve and Mike Zen, have recreated the flap course here.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, you know, what was it, last year or the year before, we had the whole
Amazing.
Taiwan contingent come to study how we do flap courses.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look at Tommy Chang's International Microsurgery Club, they have the Changgung dissection
Mm-hmm.
course with Fu Chan now. And so, and all that came from Bob Acklin, you know, my
Yeah.
teacher, who,
Yeah. And that flap course gives you an opportunity to invite 30 visiting professors all at once,
Right.
which is what's incredible.
yeah, we can't, you know, it's
Yeah.
hard to reproduce that
Yeah.
if you don't do it.
I know.
And, you know, I think our residents have benefited, the didactics and the camaraderie and the networking that can be done.
Mhm.
I think that was my biggest accomplishment there. And then sort of restoring Duke as a microsurgical powerhouse. You know, I hired Mike Zen from Chapel Hill and
Mhm.
he's worked with Clint Jones to do the reconstructive plastic surgery textbook following
Oh, yeah.
Mathis and High and all that. And Mike was just incredibly talented, worked with David Hildago, you know, in
Mhm.
New York, and then came to us, and then the rest is history. The other principle referable to that, and you know, I've talked about this when I study leadership. Malcolm Forbes always said, you know, first-class people hire people better than themselves.
Yes.
Or second-class leaders hire people worse than themselves. And you know, I've always felt, and I've always been able to say that those that I've brought on in any subspecialty, whether, you know, Jeff Marcus, for example,
Mhm.
studied with Tom Musto. He was
Mhm.
a resident with Musto. I met him as a chief resident.
Yep.
I waited for him a year and a half while he was with the group up in Toronto at Sick Kids, did his craniofacial fellowship in pediatric plastic surgery, and Jeff's a dear friend and has done a great job at Duke. But you know, he's so far better than I was in many areas. And so promoting and engaging and bringing people better than yourself as a leader makes the whole enterprise better.
Yeah,
And,
well, and it's nice that you recognize that. I think that's something that I take away from you, and I'll always share with other people about you, is that you've mentioned that in your grand rounds. You've mentioned that a number of times, and I think it takes somebody special to bring somebody who they don't feel is a threat to them potentially, or competition, etc. But
Yeah.
and it reminds me of Steve Rosen. You remind me a lot
Yeah.
of Steve Rosenberg at the NIH.
That's a nice
because
compliment, thank you.
well, he talked a lot about leadership, and one of the things that was very obvious with him is whenever you had a meal or a buffet, he was always the very last to eat. Even if there was no food left on the table, he let every single person in the room eat first. And those are the kind of the qualities
That's a
of
military principle.
Yes.
Generals eat last.
yeah, so these are the
I've always done
qualities.
that,
Yeah, and you do it too. So a lot of, and he shares a lot of things about leadership, but that even if there was no food left on the table, he would let every single person eat first. And I still remember him to this
Yeah.
day standing aside, waving everybody in. So what else do you think? You led Duke, you led Penn, you've led societies, you've led organizations, you've led journals. What do you think makes a good leader? What else?
Well, I mean, there's certain things. I think the leader, he or she or they, have to be recognized for something that they're really good at. The idea in academic medicine that, you know, you're going to be a great clinician, scientist, administrator, and educator, those should be the aspirations, and you should have, I believe, qualities in all of those areas, not deficiencies in any one of them, or else you're not credible. But humility. If I could mention one word that I think is important. Now, there are certain leaders that are not humble. Maybe the old style of, pounding the desk, and I'm the authoritarian figure and you will listen to me. That was a style then. It doesn't work in 2024. And I think the most powerful people are those that are accomplished but humble. And I think it's persona. If I think of outstanding leaders, Dave Savaston never raised his voice, never screamed, never yelled, never acted out. Arthur Rubenstein, who hired me here, I could spend hours talking about what an impact, a positive impact he had on me, watching Arthur as a leader. The old adage, the Roosevelt adage, walk softly but carry a big stick. I think that's Roosevelt, the quote from Roosevelt. Humility, a sense of self, confidence, not arrogance, experience, not bravado. A good leader admits mistakes. A good leader doesn't know everything. The ability to listen rather than to talk. And I would say something I've worked on a long time is listening to people. I'm spending a lot of time now with colleagues at Penn who come to me and, how'd you do this? What do you think about this? And so forth. And I learned this from Arthur, and any book on leadership you read, the hardest thing to do is to listen to people, right? You're already ready to jump. I have my next thought.
Correct.
I want to tell you this, and I think an exercise for all of us to become more effective in whatever we do is the ability to listen, and we forget that. So humility, the ability to listen, walk softly, but I know I can do a free flap pretty well. Am I the best in the world? No, I don't need to be. I mean, taking good care of patients, a commitment, discipline, all these things. They're generic, You run a law firm, or you're a school teacher, or you're commanding a platoon in Afghanistan, ability to listen, I think also important characteristics of leadership are that you are in the trenches with your troops, with your constituents,
Absolutely.
I think that's really important.
That's a military principle too.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, over the years, I'm here, and it's 9 o'clock at night, and faculty see me in the doctor's lounge waiting. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
I said, I'm waiting to do my last case.
Yeah, and I'm gonna share a story.
And they say, well, you're the chair. You shouldn't do this. And I said, that's totally wrong.
Yeah, well, I'm going to share a story.
Yeah.
So there is a liver transplant.
Yeah.
You, me, and Steve are the group for the liver transplants. I was at Penn. Steve was out of town. You were at Presby doing cases. You delay a case because we're unavailable. You drive, as the chair of orthopedic surgery, you drive across town to do a liver transplant, and then you go back and you resume your cases. And that speaks to really a leader leading by example for the patient, because we had to be there for the liver transplant. But to backtrack a little bit, all the qualities that you mentioned, you're basically mentioning a good person is what it comes down to. And
good person.
especially listening, I found that even when you go home, listening to your wife, listening to your kids, and that's as important, because we're so go as surgeons that sometimes we forget we have to listen to the people that matter. The other important thing that you mentioned is making a mistake, admitting it, perhaps regret. What do you think is your biggest regret or your biggest mistake in your life? That if you could go back and say, hindsight's 20/20, and we learn from our mistakes, so maybe you wouldn't go back, but if you could, what would you say?
Yeah, well, I can send you at some point the recording. Dick Gordon was a radio announcer on public radio, like the Chapel Hill, North Carolina local NPR, and he interviewed me once about being a microsurgeon. We talked about leeches, and I talked about the commitment to the patient, and thrombosis, and take backs, and how much and I talked about. He said, what was your biggest failure? This was broadcast across the country. I said, my biggest failure was my first marriage. where my mistress was Duke Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I get called about a thrombosis. I tell my kids I'm leaving right now. I remember going back and forth in the middle of the night on replant call, which I did a lot. So I'd say my biggest regret was that.
Mm-hmm.
And my first wife and I are very good friends. We had Thanksgiving together with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
She's a marvelous person. But, and I say this publicly, you know, I was enabled. You know, the fact that I'm taking every other night call with Richard Goldner to do replants was great for Duke Hospital and great for the Department of Surgery. It wasn't great for my marriage
Yeah.
and my young kids. And, you know, there's always a trade-off. And, you know, and I don't say this with pride, but I say it to call alert to younger people who say, oh, I have to work all the time, or I got to do this. I remember being on a family vacation at a beach in North Carolina, and I'm standing out at a payphone with quarters before I put a quarter in to finish an abstract for the Hand Society with my collaborators. My kids are at the beach, and Linda was at the beach with the kids, and, you know, where am I? I'm standing at a payphone. You know, we were renting a beach house or something, and that's where I had access, trying to finish an abstract. You know, I should have been with my family.
Yeah.
But learning how to compartmentalize, and of course, Dave Allen, you know, the time management guru, talks about time management.
Yeah.
There's only, you know, one of my dear friends, one of the greatest benefactors of Penn medicine in the history of Penn is Leonard Abramson, who I know quite well.
Yeah.
And Len has an expression, you know, he's done well in life. I can make money, but I can't make time.
Yeah.
I can make money, but I can't make time. And you can never make up time.
Yeah.
You can't
true.
buy time, you can't find time. And so you said, you know, what's my greatest failure? That's it. But the other thing that's important in life is don't make the same mistakes twice.
Yeah.
You know,
Very true.
You know, I subsequently found another life partner, and Helga's phenomenal, as we've talked about. And while we, and I'm including you, Dr.
Yeah.
we can drift into, you know, just inordinate amounts of work and intensity. You have to pull yourself back sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it takes a special person to recognize that regret, but then also to keep that old relationship still special with having Thanksgiving and a good relationship with it, and then to learn about that moving forward.
Yeah, you got to learn from your mistakes.
But a picture of you.
Microsurgery, same thing, right?
Yeah.
I won't do that again.
Yeah, but it's not your fault that there was a phone booth on the beach, right? Like, sorry. I'm just kidding. So that's good, and you always mention it to me. You always ask me. The first thing you ask me usually is, "How's Brittany?" That's like one of the first things you ask me. So let's shift and talk a little bit about VCA has become so important to you, and it is so important to you. You did the world's first pediatric upper extremity.
No, I have to interrupt you, doctor.
I know you're going to say. Yeah. I do want to tell the audience though that that there's usually a script for people, or there's like Chrissy sends out an organized list of who does what in these hand transplants, who takes breaks, who doesn't take whatever. Dr. Levin takes no breaks during these transplants, and I saw this at the last transplant, and until the bitter end, from the harvest, the procurement, to the actual technical details of the transplant. I don't know how you do it, but anyways, going back, so VCA, just to make you happy, we did the first pediatric hand transplant, even though it was spearheaded by you, the first transatlantic. You brought that to Penn. Avi Shaked, you have a very strong relationship with him, the transplant group here. You really wanted to do that at Duke. You're so excited about doing it here. What made you so excited about VCA, and where's that future here at Penn and just in general? Yeah,
well, the first thing I want to say is there's a hero of mine among us, and that hero is Ben Chang. And he's an incredible partner, as you know.
Yes.
He trained with Ben. Ben's an incredible surgeon. He's an incredible thinker. He's an incredible tactician. So Ben and I have really been joined at the hip. in this whole enterprise over the last now almost 16 years. Certainly, Avi's influence has been incredible. But what got me excited about it was, as you know, I was in Louisville in 1988, and Warren Breidenbach, who did the first successful unilateral hand transplant in Matt Scott here in the United States in 1999. Du Bernard did the first hand transplant in Clint Allen in 98, which was a technical success. Got the vessels to go, but a therapeutic disaster, and the arm was subsequently
Yep.
Matt Scott still has his arm 25 years later. But I studied with Warren, and then went back and was on the faculty at Duke for a while, and then 10 years after I finished my fellowship, hand transplant sort of came online with Du Bernard and then Warren, and I went up to see Warren in Louisville and worked really hard to establish a VCA program at Duke. And this was long after Bob Anderson stepped down his chair, and the chair of surgery, the people in transplant, the CEO of the hospital, none of them would give me an inch to forge ahead here, and forge ahead in VCA at Duke. And I actually did research in the lab. We heard Bobak Morar about basic science. I established a very close working relationship with the plastic surgeons at the Ninth People's Hospital in China. So Yixing Zhang was very well known internationally. He was my he was my first Tony Fung Fellow at Duke. We did all the work on consecutive transplants. And the way this evolves, and I hope you'll play this segment for Baba, is Detlev Erdmann and I were trying to get a VCA program established. So classic Savastan philosophy, the institution wasn't that interested. So I said, let's go to the lab and start doing experimental work in small animal VCA. So we had a model where we did a cardiac transplant into the carotid of a mismatched animal, and then we did a second challenge VCA in the first recipient. We did a myocutaneous abdominal flap, and that was published in PRS in 2010. But we did the work when Yixing was with me, maybe 2008, and we wrote it up, and it was accepted. And that was the exact basic science underpinning where not only did the myocutaneous flap survive, but the heart survived. And then we did Zion, who was a child that was immunosuppressed. He had a kidney from his mother, and then we gave him hands from another donor. So that's the story of why basic science is important. But I did all that work at Duke. We got nowhere, and then Serletti called me, and I was recruited here. And as part of my recruitment, said I want to start a VCA program, and that was in my contract. And of course, I had to establish it. So July 2009, I'm walking in the hallway, and this short little bald guy walks past me, and I look at his, and he says, Abraham Chiquette. So I said to him, Dr. Chiquette, I'm Scott Levin. I've heard about you. I'd like to do a hand transplant. And in Avi's classic Israeli accent, as smart as he is, and his pedigree and his...
Of course,
He goes, why not? Come see me. So here we are, 16 years later. Not only is he somebody who's like an older brother to me that I never had, we're very, very close. He's been an inspirational leader, and he and Kim and Peter Apt and
absolutely, what a great
Samir
team,
and the Penn Transplant Institute, they're like my real family. And for Steve and I, and now you, to be part of their solid organ efforts. And then, of course, with Kate O'Neill, we started the uterus transplant program here. Kate came to see me templating off what Avi, Kim, and the PTI did for hand. Uterus, if you will, is very different than hand or face, but it's in the same way as a VCA.
Of course,
Only has advantages. So we have two programs plus the CHOP program. So it's interesting. The morning I left Duke, Bill Fulkerson, who was the CEO of Duke Hospital, called me in just to sort of talk to me and say goodbye, blah blah blah. On his desk was a copy of the Boston Globe newspaper, and it was an article about Bo Pomahawk and Julian Priebach's face transplant. And I basically said, you see, Bill, we should be doing this here at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
And I came here July 2009, 9/11, 2011. 2 years later, we built the cadaver lab, we established the program, we did Lindsay's transplant then.
Wow.
And now she's almost a 14-year follow-up.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of your story of not getting into medical school, but
Mhm.
that's not going to stop you. You
No,
know,
no.
and you found a way to do it, and you just did your most recent
Yeah.
number 5.
Yeah, we, doctor, there's no I in team.
Yeah,
We, and again, crediting Ben and you and Jason Wink and Inez Lynn and, Dave Steinberg, Dave Bazenka, all.
Entire team.
Hannah Lee, everybody involved, the residents and the fellows. And that's the other beautiful thing about VCA is that, it's an inclusive enterprise. It's not an exclusive. We had nurses, the anesthesiologists, all the medical people, Emily Bloomberg, I could just go on and on. But we have an amazing team. But, obviously somebody has to lead the team, and Ben and I are very proud of what we've done. But I have to say I'm incredibly fortunate to have a person like Ben Chang doing this with me. Not to exclude you or Steve or anybody, but when
it's important.
When the rubber hits the road, we have really worked hard to create a team that we all are proud of.
Mm-hmm. No, it's in life, especially surgery. It's good to have a partner. As we talk about the co-surgeon model, Ben Chang helping you with the transplants, and then
you and I working on it.
But
I think it's really important.
And then how special it is for you. You've shown the videos of the transatlantic transplant. Celebrating with their significant other, or Zion most recently. How old is Zion now?
He's 17.
17, driving.
He has 2 jobs.
2 jobs, incredibly grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And to think about how time has flown, but also what an impact it has on just those few examples, to be able to have a kid after a uterus transplant, or get married after bilateral upper extremity transplants, drive a car as a kid,
Laurent and Terry, who's a dear friend, who's an incredible pioneer. Laurent talks about restoring dignity. We talk about humility in leaders, but restoring a person's dignity. I mean, just stop and think about the impact of that. You're totally, for the most part, totally dependent. Our most recent case, he lost his arms and legs at the age of 11. Now he's 28.
Crazy.
So he's had his parents really care for him.
Yes.
For 18 years, and he'll, Lord willing, he'll get independent function and reinnervation of the muscle transplants, restoring his dignity.
Yeah, very, very special. And a couple of more questions, more kind of about your life, and now that things after the transplant, the most recent reflections. What do you think your next step is? Like, you were chair of orthopedic surgery, chief of plastic surgery, did a lot of hand transplants, and what's your next step in life, career, everything?
Well, I think one always has to have goals. It's like a Broadway show. The curtain's not completely closed, but the finale is coming, and the curtains maybe closing a little bit.
And you're trying to keep them open.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I still want to have impact. I think, there are a lot of opportunities with robotics, following surgery. I've been on the National Academy of Science, Engineering, Medicine consensus for hand and face transplants. We're moving it from experimental to non-experimental. See VCA in my lifetime becoming insured for appropriate people. Real surgery that can be done. For those that are qualified and pass the screening and the evaluation. So advances in VCA, robotics, perhaps. I mean, again, Babak Moreira gave an incredible talk on lymphatic surgery. Seeing that evolve into our specialty. I've done a little bit with Steve on the thoracic business, but that's really his domain. I'm still very involved with the College of Surgeons.
Yep.
And I'm really passionate about, to be blunt, specialties being pulled in more and recognized in the House of Surgery. working together for the challenges of care delivery, access, advancements, value-based care, all these kind of things. And then really at this point, seeing people like yourself, helping people like yourself succeed. You know, there were people along the way that, you know, lent a hand or gave a hand or encouraged me or spoke to me. I mean, I can tell you, Bill Shaw, the late Bill Shaw, was sort of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was just a great sage, and I didn't spend a lot of time with him. Randy Sherman, who was very close to me, was an incredible person who did so much for me as a colleague and a friend. And, you know, the people that aren't here anymore, I think about a lot. Yoshi Ikuta. As a matter of fact, Ikuta's son worked in our lab here.
Oh, yeah.
So sort of paying
Yeah.
forward, come full circle. So I think trying to continue to have impact, you know, putting pen to paper. I want to write a book about hand transplant.
Yes.
You know, Joe Murray wrote Surgery of the Soul, and Tom Starzl wrote The Puzzle People. So maybe the monumental effort to write about VCA, obviously, people argue it's not life-saving, but maybe we should say it's life-saving. Art Kaplan, who's at NYU, used to be here and helped us start the hand transplant program here. And on this consensus panel, Art talked about, in some cases, particularly face, is this not life-saving? You give somebody, quote, life back. What is life? It's the heart beating and the brain functioning, but it's also the ability of the individual to integrate, to love, to hold a hand,
Absolutely.
to look somebody in the eye without somebody recoiling because of the distortion of the human face. You know, I'm getting a little philosophical or waning.
No, absolutely.
Not so elegantly, but.
But also, if you're treating somebody's, for instance, depression, you know, with
Exactly.
how are you not saving a life?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine being reclusive, or
Yeah.
you're embarrassed that your children would see you?
I know.
And to change that is profound. And so I think, Saeed, genuinely, and you and I have talked about stepping aside from being the primary surgeon. We know in medicine, particularly in surgery, people that go too long start making mistakes, aren't as sharp as they used to be. Maybe something adverse happens in the course of care of a patient. It's based on judgment or physical ability and so forth. I don't want that. I don't want that. And, you know, we have such talent here at Penn. Yourself, Steve, Inez, Jason, you know, all the people that we have around passing the baton. You know, I always say in my talks on leadership, one of my favorite quotes is from John Kennedy, 1961. The torch will be passed to the next generation. You know, when his inaugural address, the young people need to pick up the torch, pick up the mantle of enthusiasm, and you're the perfect person. You know, you have an incredible pedigree, and I'm not just saying this. You have motivation.
I'm going to edit this out.
No, you can't edit it out, because, you know, this is what this interview's about. It's really recognizing how do we pass the baton, and you should be very proud of yourself. You know, you didn't just wake up and become Saeed Azuri. You've invested and spent a lot of time becoming who you are, and you know, we are all like, I know Joe and I like wine. You know, you're like wine. You know, you're relatively new in the bottle, but if we turn you over 20 or 30 years, you know, you'll be a vintage, expensive wine. And, you know, again, I say sometimes when I give a talk, if I look back on when I started my internship in 1982, soon to be, it'll be 43 years later. 43 years later, 4 decades of what's happened, let's say, in microsurgery and reconstructive surgery. Think about it, right? The first free flap was in 1973 by Ian Taylor and Roland Damon. And here we are 50 years later.
Crazy.
Yeah.
It probably seems like it goes
so
like
the
this.
question to you is, what is this, your 3rd year in practice? Okay. So 32 years from now, you'll be sitting in this chair. And it's a wonderful thought experiment, right? To think of what will the world look like? What will our world be? Will it be all gene therapy? Will Babic establish a pill to control lymphedema? Will the T-cell be like, McDonald's? You can make a T-cell do anything you want it to do.
Artificial intelligence,
AI, right?
robots.
Right.
It's
catheter-based therapy.
It's wild.
Curing cancer.
Yeah.
Understanding the molecular biology of a devastating disease. Reversing atherosclerosis. All of this work in China that remains to be determined about drain the brain, the lymphatic channels in the brain causing Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative diseases. I mean, I'm just going on and on about what we think is ahead of us. It'll be your generation and the students and the residents that will work on this, because again, look at my history from 73 when I saw my first replant, 74. That's 50 years ago. 50. What's going to happen 50 years from now?
Yeah, it's crazy. And then to your point about the curtain closing, a new curtain opens up, and whereas, maybe the surgical curtain slowly is closing, your ability to write and teach others might be reopening
well, I don't think that'll ever go away. I think, for self-preservation, to stay active and stay engaged,
but you have more time to write a book, more time to, spend time talking to me, passing on everything you've talked about. This is a very difficult question for somebody like you.
Okay.
If you had to name one person, max 3, that if weren't involved in your life, life would be different. Like top three mentors, maybe one. Who would you say?
The first person is Leon Malmet, who was the dean at Temple Medical School. I worked in his lab as a college student, and then was able to transfer to Temple when he was dean. So Leon. I've talked a lot about Dave Savaston, who was really instrumental, and I think you'll have to give me some grace. Leonard Goldner and Jim Urbanic. Dr. Goldner was the chair before Urbanic, and then I did mention Don Surfin taking me into plastic surgery, and then the person who taught me microsurgery single-handedly and was incredible was the late Bill Barwick, who died the first year I became an attending. So that's more than 3.
I knew you'd go over. That's why.
Yeah, but there are a lot of people.
There's a lot of people, but that's.
And then Louisville, Harold Kleiner, and Ackland were the 2 people.
Yeah.
And, Fujian, but I'll stop there.
No, but it's important. I mean, this goes back to the principle: it takes a village to create a leader, and you probably picked up little things from all those different people.
I think that's the principle. I mean, I went beyond your list, so I failed the test. But the issue is,
I told you it was difficult.
I think that we, just like we observe post-op changes in a flap, or we're doing a rhidodectomy, and you want to monitor the patient's swelling or different things, picking up the good and the bad traits from those that teach you and influence you, you amalgamate them in terms of who you become. And I think that's important. You learn from everyone. You learn from the people that have, perhaps a not such good influence on you, or you say that style is not good.
Yeah.
Or those
exactly.
Those that are really exemplary. And that's how we learn. And I think that's how we evolve. And again, I started with my father, of what he represented to me, and his, Tom Brokaw wrote the book The Greatest Generation, and if you read the stories of those individuals, they're extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate to be in my time with generations of great people who taught me a lot and inspired me. Or not infrequently, we like to. My generation, you work to please your teachers, make your teachers proud. And so when I look at you, I look at Steve, Inez, Jason, those that I've been a little bit involved in training, a little bit, and see how accomplished they become. That's a source of pride. That's a source of pride. Whether I did influence or not, somehow we should all aspire to try to help each other.
Yeah.
And you help me a lot to this day. You're helping me.
Yeah.
And the ability to talk to you like this is very special.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So my kids, so you bet.
Well, it's and then learning from others' negatives, I think, is important. Like learning how to be a good mentor oftentimes is observing somebody who's not a good mentor and things like that.
Yeah.
I need 6 hours of sleep. One time, my program director at Hopkins once asked me, "How much sleep do you get?" And I'm always fascinated by people like you who do so much. But what do they do outside of work? So how much sleep do you need or you get at night? What's kind of your out of hospital routine?
I think around 6
Yeah.
will do it. Try to get a little more now that I'm getting older.
Do you do some writing or work before you actually operate in the morning, or what do you do in the morning?
I think mornings are my best time. If I have, when I was chair, I'd hold my administrative meetings at 6 to 7 or 7:15 so I could get to the OR.
So you were waking up at 5?
Oh, yeah, 4:45 usually.
Mm-hmm.
And, get into the office, do emails, whatever it is.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by
Quiet
it.
time in the morning is, you can be very productive.
Yeah. And then you walk a lot. I've seen you go on walks with Helga before. Is that like your thing to do?
Yeah, and swimming.
Swimming.
Swimming. I like to swim.
And then the last question that we ask every guest, what's your favorite surgical instrument? You're only allowed one. You can't say 3. Your favorite surgical instrument?
McCabe dissector.
Yeah. You're the second person to say that. I forgot you. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the bomb, man.
Yeah.
And it's very, very funny. I don't think I had a McCabe at Duke.
Yeah.
I don't think I learned what that instrument was until I came here. And I think, what I was using was maybe a small right angle clamp to do my tiny miniature right angle. But the McCabe is the bomb, man.
Well, this was awesome. This was really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
I
The
hope it was
audience is
okay.
going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Oh, no, this is great.
Do I get the mug?
Of course you get the mug.
Oh.
But